Hello and welcome to the Book Club Review. I'm Laura.
I'm Kate.
And this is the podcast about book clubs and the books that get you talking.
Today we bring you Bookshelf, an episode dedicated to the books we're each reading outside of book club, the ones that we get to pick and choose. And it will come as no surprise that our choices are very much being informed by the ongoing corona crisis. If ever there was a time for comfort reading, this is it. So on my list I have Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, Lost at Sea by Jon Ronson, The Salt Path by Raynor Winn, and A Shepherd's Life by James Rebanks.
And on my list, historical romp Belgravia by Julian Fellowes, creator of Downton Abbey, Hotel Pastis by Peter Mayle, the man who made Provence famous with My Year in Provence, and Assassin's Apprentice by fantasy doyenne Robin Cobb.
Keep listening to hear what we thought of them and see if there's anything here to distract you from our ongoing global meltdown.
All that coming up here on the Book Club Review. So listeners, we are not in the shed, or rather, I am not in the shed.
I'm in the shed.
I'm at home. We are in self-isolation.
But thanks to technology, we are still able to do this. I was really excited about doing a bookshelf today. I have been doing quite a lot of reading recently. All that's probably going to come to an end now because now I have to homeschool my 3 children and keep my husband from going into meltdown because of homeschooling the 3 children. So I'm going to be quite busy from now on.
And I'm actually in sort of the opposite position. My husband's restaurant has closed, and so he is at home with me for the foreseeable future. So we have 2 adults and 1 baby. So it's quite possible that I will actually get to do a bit more reading than usual.
Yeah, that's a good ratio. You know, you never want to be outnumbered by your children. That's not good. Go on then. What have you been reading?
I have been reading things that make me feel warm and fuzzy and or irritated, as you shall soon hear.
Go on then.
Why don't I start with Julian Fellowes' Belgravia, not least because that has just been adapted for a television series. A bit of period drama, that's just what you need at this time. And certainly Belgravia delivers on that. Have you ever read any of Julian Fellowes' novels?
No. So he's Downton Abbey, right?
Yes.
Oh, and Gosford Park, was that a novel before they filmed it?
Oh, I don't think it was actually. So he's a screenwriter and he's a novelist. I read a book by him called Snobs, which is about Chelsea Sloanes, and I think it was written in the 90s, or at least it felt like it was written in the 90s. It was quite dated. Belgravia, on the other hand, is a historical novel. It begins on the evening of 15th June, 1815, and it begins with this incredible ball that actually did happen on the eve of Waterloo, or a couple of days before the Battle of Waterloo, where the Duchess of Richmond threw this magnificent ball in Brussels, and it was attended by the Duke of Wellington and all the rest.
I think I know about this from a Georgette Hare novel. I think there's a Georgette Hare novel, which is an interesting one because it features several of the characters from her other novels, which she never did. And I have an idea that they meet at this strange social occasion just before this massive, massive battle.
Right, because at this ball they get word that actually Napoleon's on the march, and so all the men have to leave to go fight a tremendous battle. Our characters are fictionalized, so there's James and Anne Trenchard, and they are from the working class but have done good in the sense that they are supplying the armies, and so they've become the army, rather, the British one. Well, no, I guess what do I know about Napoleon? Not much. All the people who were fighting against Napoleon. He is basically a greengrocer, but, you know, on a massive scale, and he's supplying the army. And they have a beautiful daughter named Sophia, and she has somehow got them an invitation to this ball. Why would she have an invitation? Well, she's been socializing with a young aristocratic man who the father, James Trenchard, believes is very much going to marry his daughter, even as his wife is like, there's really no chance at all, and we should not be encouraging this liaison. The men get pulled away to the battle, and their daughter descends into hysteria. Like, she's seen something. What has she seen? And then it flashes forward 26 years, and actually their daughter Sophia has died.
Oh my goodness, spoiler.
No, but I mean, it's what is it? You know, that's kind of like the foreword. I have to tell you that. And her aristocratic lover, whose name I really should remember but can't, he died in that battle. So we're left with James and Anne Trenchard. They have no children, but actually in the intervening years, they become even more successful.
James has partnered with the real-life Thomas Cubitt to build the new luxurious neighbourhood of Belgravia, which Londoners will know sits between Victoria Station and Sloane Square and is characterised by these huge mansions, which when they were built were sort of the first of their kind in terms of size and scale and grandeur. And James has been crucial to the building of this neighborhood. He's made his fortune. He lives in one of these mansions, and he's desperate to crack aristocratic society. Now, from here I have to be careful because I don't want to give too much away. This story centers around a secret, but what I can say is that Fellowes has done something super weird in that the bad guys want to expose this secret, but the good guys also want this secret to come out. And so actually there's no real narrative tension, which sort of baffled me. I was like, why would I care? What are the stakes? If everyone just wants the secret to get out, well, I guess it should just come out and that will be that. So yeah, quite odd, but it's a bit of fluff. It's a bit of escapism. It's no Georgette Hare, I would say, just so you're forewarned. That said, ITV have adapted it for television, and I think it's on right now. So maybe it would be a better TV program than a book. I almost wonder if that's what Fellowes had in mind when he wrote it, and no one would buy the script, so he wrote the novel instead.
Well, it's interesting you say about something that was written for television. I read Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. This came up because we did an interview with the London Archive Book Club. This wonderful book club that is based in the London Archives here in London. It's a resource research centre where anyone who wants to can go, and if you want to sort of research your family or research your little corner of London, they have miles and miles and miles of shelves which have got all this documentation, and you can go and they'll help you find out what you want to know. But they have this book club and they only read books about London, and then what they do is they go into the archives and they fish out various bits of ephemera that kind of relate to the book. So it's so interesting. Because we were talking about London and London books, this book Neverwhere came up, and I'd never read it. I'll just read you the blurb. Under the streets of London, there's a place most people could never even dream of. A city of monsters and saints, murderers and angels, knights in armour and pale girls in black velvet. This is the city of people who have fallen between the cracks. Richard Mayhew, a young businessman, is going to find out more than enough about this other London. A single act of kindness catapults him out of his workday existence and into a world that is at once eerily familiar and utterly bizarre, and a strange destiny awaits him down there. I've got the Kindle edition, and there's quite a nice little introduction from Neil Gaiman where he explains that he originally wrote the story for a television series. He sort of got slightly frustrated with that format, and so I think at the time he also wrote a novel. He then got frustrated when they filmed the television series because they kept changing bits and taking bits out, and he kept saying, okay, you know what, I'm going to put it back in the book. And then after it finished, he then sat down to write the book that he thought it should have been all along. So this version I have on my Kindle now is, as I understand it, the sort of definitive final version of Neverwhere. But so even that was quite interesting, and I sort of felt slightly in keeping with the story itself. It's a very multi-layered story, and he said that what he wanted to do was to write a book that would do for adults what the books that he'd loved as a child had done for him, books like Alice in Wonderland or the Narnia books or The Wizard of Oz. And he wanted to talk about the people who fall through the cracks, to talk about the dispossessed using the mirror of fantasy, which can sometimes show us things we have seen so many times that we never see them at all for the very first time. It does have that feeling slightly of being almost written for children, in that I found the characters, none of them are very deep. You know, they have sort of quite sketchy backstories. There's this character, Richard, who ends up kind of getting pulled down into this undercity, this incredible land that lies beneath London's streets. There's a lost aristocratic girl, and the Lady Dore. Her family has been murdered and she's trying to avenge their deaths. They are a couple of absolutely brilliant villains. I don't know how you felt about Mr. Croup and Mr. Vandermeer. Kind of otherworldly, sort of caricatures of evil characters, but nonetheless sort of horrifying and funny and strange in equal measure. And I did love the inventiveness of it and the richness with which he takes this idea of the city of London and all these different places that we know so well we don't really think about, and really kind of reinvents them, looks at them with new eyes. And I love that. And he absolutely made me look at the city with new eyes when I finished this book, which, as I got more drawn in, I just could not put down. I would be kind of running up to bed at night thinking, yay, I'm going to sit down and read a bit more of this. So I recommend it because it's just a brilliant escapist novel. It's not too demanding. It carries you along. There's a brilliant character called the Marquis de Carabas, who I always thought was going to turn into a cat. I always thought that was going to be Historia. And I was surprised when that didn't happen. I kind of wish it had been a bit deeper. I almost felt, this is going to sound so awful, but if he just worked a bit harder on it. It was one of those ones, where he had given them a bit more backstory and he'd gone a bit deeper. But I think the fun of it is you feel like he doesn't really care about any of that. He's not really that bothered. He knows that it doesn't really matter. Because actually, to tell a brilliant story, you need all these other elements, which actually, he throws in brilliantly. And I think also, in a way, perhaps sometimes for a fantasy to really work, you need to be able to project onto it a little bit. And so perhaps deliberately, he's kind of kept it slightly blank. I don't know. It's hard to say.
I always think that Neil Gaiman writes... I always think he is a storyteller rather than just a writer. So he almost creates fairy tales that sort of sit separate from the literary tradition. Have you read Coraline? Do not read that to your children. It is terrifying.
I'm curious to read other things by him now. Yeah. We've got a book about a boy who grows up in a graveyard. I thought the premise sounded really good, but a friend said to me, oh, actually, you should read that before you read it to the children because it's quite dark. I think what I loved about this was it's brilliantly dark in some places. Richard has to go through a sort of challenge, a test. There's a kind of like standard fantasy trope quest where they have to go and find a key and then they have to get the key back to a certain place. And there's all these sort of reasons why they have to be traveling around. And when they get to this place where the key is, he has to kind of go through this ordeal in order to win the key. But the ordeal itself was really haunting and beautifully done, I thought, which is to do with almost fighting off depression and loneliness. And all of this taking place on a London tube platform and people walking past and not seeing what's going on. And that was the brilliant thing about it, I thought. I felt that I was looking at people who don't have anywhere to go in the city with new eyes. I mean, you look at everything with new eyes. You even look at the pigeons with new eyes after you've read this story. But yeah, no, so just as a brilliant bit of escapism, really just to take your mind off everything that's going on out there. I can't recommend this highly enough. I thought it was great.
My major comfort read at the moment is revisiting Robin Cobb's Farseer Trilogy, which was the first of her books set in this world. Ooh, what is the world called? I'm not even sure. But she's written 4 trilogies and they're all in different lands in this fantastical world she's created.
Is this the one about the ships that are
That is
alive?
The second trilogy, which is probably my favourite, the Live Ship Trilogy. But this is the Farseer Trilogy, which is about a young boy who grows into a young man over the course of the first book. And he is the bastard son of the king in waiting. No one has known about him. His father didn't know about him until he is 6 years old. And he is left on the stoop of this kind of outlying castle in the kingdom. And says, this is chivalry's bastard son. And he looks so much like his father that it's never in question. However, unusually for most kingdoms, this is a source of great shame that the king in waiting has fathered a bastard child, even though it was before his marriage, which in my mind makes a slight difference, but whatever. So he actually doesn't abdicate, but removes himself from the line. And our protagonist, Fitz, never meets his father, who is assassinated within a year. And Fitz is left in this kind of cutthroat court trying to survive. And he is taken under the wing of the chief assassin who lives in the quarters of the castle, Chade. And he is trained up to work on behalf of the king, King Shrewd, and to serve him as an assassin. The key thing to know is I read this trilogy when I was 13 years old. And at a time when my life changed a lot because I went to high school, I didn't have any friends. It was all traumatic, angst. And actually, I'm just going back in time to this like cozy world, which is very much in the vein of Game of Thrones. And if you do like Game of Thrones, this is sort of the soft, warmer version of that. But right now, I don't want to read anything that kind of reminds me about our usual contemporary lives. I either want to go into a fantastical world or I want to go back in time. And actually, that's perhaps an odd segue. You might think that Peter Mayle's Hotel Pastis would be too close to the world we live in today. But no, not so. Because it was written in 1992, and it is a real blast from the past.
Tell people what it's about, because I know that book very well.
It is. Have you read it then?
You're holding. Yeah, no, it's been on my shelf for years and years. When it first came out, I read it and loved it.
I wonder if you'd read it with fresh eyes now after the Me Too movement.
Oh no, I have looked at it since and it absolutely does not stand up. It really doesn't. It's kind of shocking.
Let's give our readers a taste of what it's all about. 42-year-old ad man Simon Shaw is rich, successful, newly divorced and bored. Yearning for a life free of complications, he escapes to the bright skies and vivid landscape of Provence. There, buoyed by the enchanting Nicole and his inimitable butler Ernest, Simon enthusiastically transforms the gendarmerie of Brassières-les-Deux-Églises into the Hotel Pastis, a haven for the rich and famous. So I picked this up off the shelf of your Paris flat and loved it.
There you go. You see, that's the thing. It's good.
But
That's
it's
the
so
trouble.
bad, Kate.
I know, but it's just what he does very well is the kind of like lifestyle escapism, I think. So the whole thing about just even the affluent ad man's world, nice dinners and luxury cars, and he's got this sort of butler who looks after him, and then he goes off and he's down in Provence and it's beautiful, and he finds this beautiful old hotel and there's a beautiful girl, and you know, it's all very seductive as a bit of escapism. And there's that idea of someone going off and kind of building something, and you know, there are challenges and is he going to overcome them, and you know, there's a slight kind of hook as to whether or not he's going to make this work. But you know, talk about caricatures. I mean, my God, the characters.
The description of the women is actually...
Oh, yeah, no, I know.
is actually shocking. I have a few choice quotes.
Come on then, hit us up.
All these thoughts passed through the minds of the detectives as they listened carefully and made notes, stopping only to ask for more coffee and another sight of the quite admirable bottom and tanned legs of Françoise.
But these are
no, not always.
No, totally serious point. I mean, the whole Gabrielle Matzneff story that's going on in France and the uncovering of a kind of a tolerance that's been going on in that society for years of you know, kind of older men and young girls.
Hey, no, the British are just as bad. This is Peter Mayle. I was talking to my mum about it and she's like, oh yeah, Peter Mayle's a dirtbag. I mean, because it is a worldview. So here we're talking about Billy Chandler, the most pugnacious photographer in London. And Simon's recalling he'd even been knocked out once by a model, one of those big girls he couldn't resist trying to jump on. Simon couldn't help liking him, but he was a definite social liability. But you know, I kind of just read all of that, not with good humour, but I was a bit like, oh my God, I can't believe this. Like, this was written in 1992. It isn't that long ago.
It's like Mad Men, but without any of it being tongue-in-cheek.
The main female character, Nicole, who invites Simon down to Provence because she has this vision for a hotel. It is her vision. And she sees Simon as, well, someone who can realize it because he has the funds and he's also handsome. And she's newly divorced and her alimony isn't paying enough money. So she sets about building this hotel with, I say with Simon, but not really. It's Simon's butler, Ernest, and Nicole who realize it and make it into this incredible hotel. And then at the end of the novel, and I don't care if this is a spoiler, at the end of the novel, Simon gets a job offer because he realizes that actually running a hotel day to day isn't really for him. He wants to be out in the big wide world. He's a little bit worried though about Ernest because, you know, Ernest has poured himself into this hotel. But don't worry, he's got a buyer for the hotel and they're going to make sure that Ernest can run it and get a share. What about Nicole is what I'm thinking. I'm like, sorry, what? Like, this was Nicole's vision. And actually, at no point in the entire novel do they talk about Nicole receiving any compensation for working 12-hour days at the hotel, for receiving any shares for what she is doing there. No, that's irrelevant. Simon tells Nicole that he's going to need a change. And do you want to know how it ends? I mean, you do know how it ends, but honestly...
Well, I can't remember.
Nicole left her chair and came to sit on Simon's lap. You're interested, aren't you? Something new and big like that? That sounds like an innuendo, but actually she's talking about the job. Simon stroked the smooth skin of her arm. How do you feel about it? She shook her head. Do you think I'd let you go off all by yourself with a suitcase full of dirty shirts? She got up and took his hand. Let's go see Ernest. So she's out. She's like, oh, I don't need this beautiful hotel. I've poured my soul into it. It was my vision. I'll just go and do your laundry in New York with your new job.
I mean, the point is that she's fallen in love with Simon. He's fallen in love with her, and they're going to go off.
No, Kate,
together, leading a life of considerable luxury.
It is so insidious. And actually, that was the point that I kind of put the book down. Like, oh, this is so dirty. Like, in Peter Mayle's world, Nicole has done nothing. Right? She is like a bit part character. She's just a nice pair of legs.
Yeah, it's very much a middle-aged man's fantasy novel. And when I put it on the shelf in Paris, I have a thing. The bookshelves are all books that kind of relate to Paris in some way, or France. That's the idea anyway. So I took this one from London and I stuck it over there. But I have to say, when I stood there and I flipped through it, putting it on the shelf, I read a bit of that and I was like, oh, is this just going to annoy people? I'm not sure I should leave this here. But you know what? Then having read a little bit, I read a little bit more and I read a little more and I was like, well, it's just a good read. It's a good read.
I may have felt dirty, but I loved it.
So problematic books like that. I think that's the best thing he wrote as well. He wrote a few more and they were all terrible. One of them was made into a film with Russell Crowe and the film was not too bad, but the book was awful. The book was really paper thin. I think Hotel Pastis is arguably his best work.
I have been talking a lot, but before I hand back over to you to tell me what you've been reading, I wanted to gift you remotely a comfort read.
What's that?
A comfort read.
That's very big and thick.
Well, wait a second.
What is that? It's filling the screen.
A comfort read, which I'm not going to lie, I'm probably going to read it before I give it to you, now that it's in my house and I'm not going to see you for how many weeks, we do not know. And it's for Paris. It's called Hunting and Gathering by Anna Gavalda.
Oh, you've mentioned her. So she's a French writer. She's very successful, isn't she? And well known in France.
And I adore this book. I've read it 2 or 3 times already, and I think I'm going to reread it again. It's set in Paris, and it is about Camille, who, as the back cover says, is doing her best to disappear. She barely eats, works at night as a cleaner, and lives in a tiny attic room. Philibert Marquette de la Derbellière is a stammering, erudite aristocrat who sells postcards outside a museum. One evening, he overcomes his own excruciating reticence to rescue Camille, unconscious, from her freezing garret and install her in the large, ornate apartment he is taking care of downstairs. He already has an unlikely flatmate, the foul-mouthed, talented young chef Frank, who is made more obnoxious by guilt about his beloved grandmother, who in turn forms an unlikely bond with his new friends. Apart, they may be hopeless, but together this curious, damaged little quartet may be able to face the world. It's wonderful. And I made sure that I got you the American edition because the cover is so much nicer. It has a box of pastels on the front. Well, thank you. And at some point it shall be yours.
Yeah, well, I look forward to a time when I'll be able to stop home educating my children and curl up and read it. Before all this corona thing kicked off, I picked up in the Oxfam bookshop a hardback copy of Lost at Sea by Jon Ronson. I like Jon Ronson a lot. I feel like maybe he divides people, but I'm definitely a fan. He almost does in written form what Louis Theroux does on television. He seeks out curious stories, people, situations, and he investigates them a little bit and he writes about them. And this is a really brilliant book of essays. I had thought, because I hadn't seen it before, that it was perhaps something new, but actually looking it up, it was published in 2012, so it's been around and it's obviously just something I missed. I first discovered Jon Ronson when I read a book of his called The Psychopath Test, which I love, where he's exploring psychopaths, psychopathy. And actually there's some kind of quite startlingly high proportion of human beings who have this personality trait in which they have zero empathy, they think very differently from everyone else. And, really interesting to consider that it's not actually their fault. They don't mean to be like that. That's just how they are. And he kind of explores that world. And it's brilliant fun. I think we did it for book club and we had a great time afterwards just going through all the people we know, trying to work out whether we thought they were psychopaths or not. But so this...
I listened to that on audiobook and really enjoyed it. It's a good one. Definitely, if you're going for long walks at the moment, I'd recommend the audio.
I think what I really like about him is he is a funny writer. Like, often this made me smile. But at the same time, he's also very intelligent and curious and good at investigating things and drawing together the details and exploring things in a really interesting way. And so these are things that make you smile, but they also really make you think. This is a series of essays. I think many of them might have been pieces that he wrote for The Guardian that are kind of been collected here, or I don't know if he's expanded them or not. The first one's called Thinking Inside the Box, and it's about the TV series Deal or No Deal. Do you remember that with Noel Edmonds? And all the contestants would stand around with these boxes. And in one was 1p and it went all the way up to 250,000. But you didn't know what was in the boxes. The contestants didn't know. Noel Edmonds didn't know. The banker didn't know. No one knew, What he's exploring is spending time with the contestants who all live together for the duration of the filming of the programme. So they get to know each other quite well. And they all have these different theories about one's got a system, one does it completely randomly. And really what he's exploring is people's personalities and psychology and why, as a nation, we all love that show so much. Like, why do we all watch it? Why was it so compulsive? It's really interesting to consider.
Because it's essays, can you read one kind of before you go to bed so you feel like you've accomplished something?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, absolutely brilliant for that. Really good. And I would find actually at little moments where I had like kind of, 20 minutes free or something, I would just go and get it and sit down. They're not all funny, some of them are quite serious. There's one about the kind of assisted suicide industry. So believe it or not, there's a world out there of people who help other people to end their lives. And,
that's legal in Canada.
Well, exactly. So it's legal in Canada. It's legal in some states in America, but not all states. It's not legal here. And there's sort of things people might have heard of, like Dignitas in Switzerland. I don't know, again, not something I'd ever really remotely thought about, but turns out, and so through him, I ended up learning a little bit about this, and it's just really interesting. There's a good one about psychics where he goes on this cruise, and there's this woman who is a psychic, and, she's not someone really like all psychics. I don't know, it's a very questionable industry that arguably preys on people's willingness to believe and their sort of sadness and desperation because they've lost people who are very close to them. But he manages to explore all that in quite a funny way. So, I don't know, it's a hard one to sum up. But again, I just thought, for me, this has been a really nice distraction. I've really loved reading it. And it's made me think about lots of things that aren't in any way related to pandemics, which is good. I've also just been thinking about things that I read before all this thing started, and I was reminded of The Salt Path, which I read for my mum's book club. That's an extraordinary book about a couple who lose everything. They make a bad investment through a friend, which then comes back to haunt them when years later the friend wants the money back, and they say, well, no, that wasn't the agreement that we had. And then the friend takes them to court. They then spend years fighting expensive legal battles, and they lose all their money in the process of fighting this court case. They then end up defending themselves, and finally it comes down to a moment where they think they found the evidence they need to prove that, in fact, the agreement that they had with this other person was not valid. But because they're representing themselves and they don't really know what they're doing, they don't really submit it properly, with the result that the judge refuses to consider it as evidence, and they lose the case. And their home is to be seized by bailiffs and used to pay this debt. They have 2 children who have left home. They're at university. They lose this farm, which they have lived on all their lives, and they used to run a B&B, so that was also their business. They used to have people come and stay, and they lose it all. And it starts with this just extraordinary, powerful couple of chapters where it's, them hiding in the cupboard under the stairs as the bailiffs bang on the door to take everything from them. Everything that made up their lives, their memories, all their possessions, the spaces that they've lived in, their livelihoods, their income, everything is going to be taken away, and they just hide.
This does not sound like comfort reading to me.
Bear with me, folks. I know it's not sounding good. And then, chapter 2, they go to the doctor because the husband, Moth, his name is, has not been feeling well. And they go to the doctor and they find out that the reason he hasn't been feeling well is because he actually has a terminal illness. He has a degenerative disease. That means that as it progresses, he will eventually, he will die. And so, yes, it's a double whammy. And I swear, this book has been a Sunday Times bestseller. It's been, hugely widely acclaimed by people. My book club wanted to read it for a while, and it kept coming up, and I kept saying, I just don't know if I can face it. I really don't want to read it. And they were like, but it's supposed to be so good. And so finally this time around, I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to plunge in. It'll be fine. I was in floods of tears by page 19. I mean, oh my God, it starts with such an emotional gut wrench. But the thing is, what they do is they decide that they are going to walk. They're going to walk the Southwest Coast Path, which is this long trail that's kind of like a national park that goes all the way around the bit that sticks out at the bottom of England, the kind of foot that's like Dorset, Devon and Cornwall. So you can go all the way around it along the coast. And they're going to camp. They're going to wild camp. They just take a tent and that's what they're going to do.
Kate, and I've just realised, if I didn't have a small baby, that would be the best way to go through quarantine ever.
Yes. Well, so this is the thing. So they set off. They've got this tent. They've got hardly any money. There's even this, it's like everything just seems to go so badly for them. So they think they're going to get a weekly payment that's almost like their social security or whatever it is. They get a certain amount every week, I think it is, but it's hardly anything, but nonetheless they've got this sort of £45 or whatever it is. And then the first time they go to the cash machine to try and get it out, there's nothing there. And they call the bank and they were like, we thought we were going to have this money. Why isn't there any money? And the bank said, there was a direct debit from your property and it's just gone through because they'd forgotten to cancel this direct debit. So,
God,
the things that happen to these two, and they're living off like just sort of, like one packet of noodles they had to make last a week or something. It's all just really dreadful. But they have each other and they have a kind of purpose, I suppose, in that they've set themselves this task of going on this walk. It's about their interactions with other people. It's about their relationships with themselves. It might not surprise you to learn, because I brought this up and because I managed to read it and because actually I thought at the end it was a really extraordinary book, that there is a kind of transformative thing that happens to them as they go on this walk. That is to do with, I think, finding a kind of inner resilience and an understanding that you can lose all of the trappings of a comfortable middle-class Western life. And what are you left with? You're left with yourself, and you're left with, your relationship with, in her case, her husband and her children. And there's a kind of inner resilience and a strength that you see her kind of connecting with that kind of grows. And so, nothing is particularly that much better at the end of the book than it was at the beginning of the book. Good things do happen to them to kind of slightly offset all the awfulness. Luckily, there is a bit of karma there. And by the end of the book, they're in a different place, not only physically, but also in terms of their economic situation than they were at the very beginning.
And presumably now she's a best-selling author.
And then you know that as well. So reading the book, you sort of know, because you see all the quotes and you can see Sunday Times bestseller on the front. And so there's kind of strange foreknowledge that you have when you read it, that you kind of slightly project. And obviously when she wrote it, she didn't have any idea it was going to be published. And in fact, she wrote it for him. She wrote it for her husband because apparently the condition that he has means that he will lose his memory. And so the thing that originally prompted her to sit down and set this story down on paper was to preserve those memories so that he could read them and remember them that way. I think the thing that I really took from it the most was the sense of hope. That's what you're left with at the end. And it starts from a place where she has no hope. She's just in total despair. And you're right there with her. Oh my goodness, it's just awful. And, it's facing up to for most people, I'd say it's one of our fundamental fears. How would we survive? How would we cope? And, in a very small way, we're starting to experience a little bit of that now. These are difficult times, more or less so for different people. It's affecting everyone in different ways. There's something really terrifying about that. And yet I did feel in this book, there are lessons and there's a wisdom there that she gains through this very difficult experience that they go through, that she offers up to you to say, you can read this and you can learn what I learned, kind of thing. And I thought for that, it was an extraordinary read. I thought it was amazing. Have to say, it was a very interesting book club book, because when we discussed it, I sort of thought, I went along and I was like, oh my goodness, everyone's just going to be completely blown away by this book. It was amazing. And actually, it was quite divisive. And there were a couple of people who really were not taken with it at all. They didn't think the writing was very good. She's not a writer. And it kind of shows. And there was a suggestion from one member of the book club that she may even have made some of it up. Which I just thought, because I very much take things, maybe I'm a bit too credulous, I don't know, but of all of the criticisms I would have thought you could have made against this book, I was really shocked by that one, because to me it's a book where the essence of what's amazing about it is this sort of sense of honesty and truthfulness and, going through this thing and taking you with us.
I would believe it. I'm very credulous as well. Is that the word?
Yeah, I have to say that it never occurred to me. But weirdly, even though it's the sort of thing that I wanted to run a mile from, and I certainly never expected I would be sitting down and read it, actually, I found it so rewarding and life-enhancing, and I would recommend it. In difficult times, maybe sometimes difficult books are what help us, because we can learn things from them. And I think this is very much a book about that. And it's about appreciating your footprint in the sand on a beach, there's sort of element of that. When you really take it back to the absolute essence of what we need to survive and to be content, actually it's not very much. And the sort of trappings that we surround ourselves by, do they, enhance our lives, or in some ways do they somehow hold us back? I don't know. It raises
You can mull these
questions.
things over as you spend lots and lots of time in parks and the great outdoors over the coming weeks and months.
Exactly, and try to find empty spaces. So there was that, and then finally, on your recommendation, a long time ago when we did it, you talked about it on the podcast. I got a copy of The Shepherd's Life by James Rebanks. So many a podcast ago, I can't remember which one it was, but Laura talked about this book and how much she enjoyed it. Surprise hit of the year, Daily Mail. It is a book about sheep farming in the Lake District. It's mainly about sheep. There's very little to kind of upset or distress you in here, because the main.
It also has a heartwarming story about James Rebanks. I think of The Shepherd's Life as the English version of Educated with less childhood drama.
Yeah, I totally see that. Tara Westover's Educated. Yeah, I think that's true. He writes very well. Also, it's full of love and nostalgia for a way of farming that his grandfather's generation that's sort of vanished now. Even just reading about that makes you feel happy because it's just, beautifully described and simple and feels like, he's kind of getting at the essence of things. I'm loving it.
I'm so glad you love it. We talked about it on Bookshelf a while back.
Yeah.
It occurs to me that James Rebanks was commissioned to write this book because he became such a hit on Twitter. And if anyone is looking for upbeat tweets rather than doom and gloom, I can imagine, I don't know this for sure, but I can imagine and hope that he would be tweeting regularly about life in the Lake District and the sheep and spring coming. And actually, maybe that's exactly what we all need to hear at this time in our lives.
There's a little bit I read and I folded the corner because I just thought it kind of summed it up. One school night, I was walking with my dad across one of the meadows to check on our ewes before it rained. He stopped suddenly, told me to be quiet, and then crawled forward for 20 yards and kind of pounced like a fox with his cap in his hands. He smiled me across. He'd caught a leveret, a baby hare. It was nestled gently in his flat cap in the grass, one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen. It looked up at us with deep glassy eyes and screamed. We let it go, and it sloped off out of sight. Towering, dark cotton wool clouds were gathering all about us, and away to the Pennines thunder and flashes of lightning. We ran back to the Land Rover, with big fat raindrops soaking us.
He does write beautifully, and he's Oxbridge educated. That's why I make the comparison to Tara Westover. He's a really interesting man. Don't you want to kind of sit down and have a pint with him?
I don't know, because he's got a kind of edge to him. I mean,
you think maybe he wouldn't want to sit down and have a pint with you? Well,
I'm very much an urban creature, but I am actually a farmer's daughter. And so a lot of it I related to in quite a practical way. Like I definitely have done the whole bale carting in summer thing completely, like absolutely knew like physically what it's like to do a lot of the things he's talked about because I've done them too. We were made to go bale carting and, clean out grain stores, and my sister and I
always forget this about you.
Unfortunately, unlike James Rebanks, I didn't have a deep desire to become a farmer myself. But that was interesting for me, and maybe a kind of an angle on it that makes me enjoy it more, perhaps because it was reminding me about all of that. But I think for anyone, it's just one of those classic, there's this thing, isn't there, where it's become like a kind of fashion for workplace memoirs. So, for example, there's the Adam Kay book, This Is Going to Hurt, which is a memoir about someone working as an NHS doctor. And you think of 100 of there's a sort of thing, isn't there? But it's almost like the shepherd's life is really that for farming.
Yeah, I can see that.
I'm really enjoying it. And yeah, it's just very
wonderful.
Very comforting. You know where you are with you.
Well, as a teaser for what we might discuss on our next bookshelf, I picked up The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin from Oxfam for £1 the other day. And, dun dun dun, hefty Hilary Mantel, The Mirror and the Light is in my hand now.
She's got the hardback.
It's chunky.
Yeah. I will read that. I'm feeling a bit guilty that there's a few long books that I'd like to read, but I haven't. I keep saying I'll read Ducks Newburyport and then not getting around to it. I keep picking it up, reading a few pages, thinking, oh yeah, this is completely extraordinary, and then putting it down and then not making much progress. I think for me, definitely for the next few weeks, it's going to be just short things that I can fit in.
Yeah, and because I'm so distracted by my phone all the time, I'm just finding that I do need something that's really kind of light and gripping to keep me engaged. Otherwise, I'll just fall back into the news.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well,
that's everything for today. We will put the books we've mentioned beyond, the books that we've just been reading into our show notes in case anyone wants to find those.
And if this remote podcast recording, editing thing works out okay, then Laura and I will do our best to keep our shows coming. We've also got a couple of interviews that we recorded before the corona shutdown. So we will hopefully keep some fresh content coming out and help distract everyone from everything that's going on.
That's all for this episode. We'll have another one coming soon. And in the meantime, if you'd like to see what we're up to between episodes, follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Book Club Review Podcast, on Twitter at Book Club RVW Pod, or you can email us, thebookclubreview@gmail.com.
And if you're not already, why not subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts? Please take a moment to rate, review and subscribe to us on iTunes. In this time of corona crisis, when people need good podcasts more than ever, it helps other listeners find us and means you'll never miss an episode. But for now, stay safe, read some great books, and take care.